What's up, everybody? Once again, it is I, James, coming to you from the Nerdy Musings podcast studio. I am very excited to be joined today by a gentleman known for his smoldering intensity. You may know him from the InkPulp Podcast. He is the bane of Matteo Scalera's existence from time to time, the prolific artist, Mr. Eric Canete. How you doing today,
Hello.
sir?
Yo, thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
I'm doing good. I appreciate you being here.
Yeah, man. Yeah, man. Thank you.
You know, it's funny. The previous guest I recorded with today was singing the praises of Mr. Matteo.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah,
Well,
and I said,
that's money well spent, I think, from
I
Matteo
said,
then.
the guest I have coming on might have something to say otherwise.
Jokes aside, the
All
bit
in good
aside.
fun, I know.
Yeah, exactly. Matty is a good guy. As a matter of fact, he's the closest thing I have to a brother, and Shawn as well. That's not blood related. So
That's awesome.
To be in the same room with them at any given time during the week, an hour might be too long, but certainly, the opportunity there is it's a blessing for me.
Yeah. And Matteo made a really strong, positive impression on the young man I had on, so that was really cool to hear.
That's good.
Yeah,
That's great.
Took
End of the day, that's
took
what
a
matters.
lot of his time out of his busy schedule at a convention, and literally went over every page of the guy's comic that he showed him. So I thought that was pretty neat to hear.
That's awesome. Yeah. I think that comes from a place of like Matty having gone through that himself. Like, I don't know if you heard it on the podcast, but Matteo came to the United States knowing maybe, I don't know, like a dozen words in English. He went to the biggest show in the country of San Diego Comic-Con, and all he was trying to do was make some sort of headway. And I think now that level of relatability where people are trying to, move one rung up the ladder as far as their craft and their overall execution is concerned. I think Matty can relate to that. So I think that's where that comes from,
Yeah, he's seeing some of his self in the others who are coming up and trying to make it in the business.
Yep, for sure.
Speaking of making it in the business, take us back to kind of how you got your start and what made you lean towards animation, comics, concept art, all of these type of things. Has that love for art just been there since your earliest memories?
I think so. I mean, drawing has always been at the top of the list as far as what I wanted to do for a living. My family, who are full of academics, probably didn't agree with that, or at the very least, they didn't have any experience in it, so they couldn't see a future.
Right.
But yeah, no, I always wanted to draw for a living. I didn't know. I wanted it to be about comics, but unfortunately, I just wasn't good enough to make any sort of headway right at the beginning of that image boom. Right, I was trying to do a style that was closer to a show called Aeon Flux. Really sort of like push proportions, super skinny people, and back then they were hiring anybody but, right? Because they had a certain look of what comics sold back when.
Yeah.
And so it just happened to be that my portfolio got seen by animation related people. And that's how I got brought onto those different sorts of productions. The great part about that is I ultimately I didn't care. I got to draw for a living, and somebody else was paying me for an education as opposed to the other way around, because in every studio that I landed, I understood what a great opportunity and a blessing it was. So I bugged as many of those, incumbent / long-term professionals as I could to gain some of their knowledge and apply it into the craft that I was doing for that project.
And did you find that there was a lot of crossover between what you learned working in animation and then when you eventually did transition over to comics? Was there a lot of carryover between the two?
I think so. I mean, if I just bracket it to like storytelling, I first got on. Well, here's the thing. I was doing a lot of ghost work for a lot of different animation productions way back when. I might have been 19, 20 years old, maybe potentially younger. So if you do the math, that's right around the time that X-Men 97, the original one, came out, right? So I was doing ghost work for that and Stone Protectors and Exo Squad, and I was just doing a lot of environment design. So that's how I kind of sharpened my background / perspective chops. But when Peter Chung, who created Aeon Flux, brought me on board to do the second season, the Aeon Flux season that had dialogue in it. Um, he brought me on as an environment designer, but right when my tenure was about to end, because the show was basically coming to an end, he said, well, what else can you do? And he happened to be behind, I think this is, if I recall, this is how the story goes, was that he was behind an episode because he was not only doing directing, but also supervising, producing, and all the kind of the post work that you were doing for every animation process during a production. So he just caught behind an 8-ball schedule-wise. It just wasn't enough hours in the day. And he asked me to take on a certain segment in which he trained me to become a storyboard artist.
Oh, very cool.
So that was my first taste of like doing storyboards full time, and really the crossover there. And then eventually a buddy of mine named Jay Oliva, who was directing on the Masters of the Universe. I can't remember. Is it 2005, 2003?
I think so, yeah.
He was the executive producer, and he brought me on to do storyboards for that show. And then eventually that just rolled over into working for my good friend Sam Liu over at Warner Brothers. And we were doing the Batman, the one that was designed by Jeff Matsuda. And from there, I went on to Teen Titans. It's storyboard across the board there for a while for me. And the big sort of takeaway, it's just storytelling, right? And the thing that I learned when I was coming up looking at image stuff, which was just like doing dynamic poses, potentially like super cool characters, I kind of went away from that and just started doing more like obvious, and less sort of like less ultra dynamic compositions, but more for clarity. That was the thing that unlocked things for me in my head, because like in animation, you need to be as clear as possible as far as storytelling. Sure, you can stack things in like foreground, middle ground, background, but ultimately, like the clearer something reads, the better your audience can understand the story that you're trying to tell. And that was a big component that I learned, the big sort of, skill set.
Probably helped with speed too, because I know with concept art, like a lot of that, you're having to bang it out pretty quick, aren't you?
Yeah, well, storyboarding in general, back when, I mean, to this day, still, I remember I took a panel count I worked on Tron Uprising for Disney, and everybody had switched to digital, everybody was using a program called Storyboard Pro. I was the last holdover doing things traditional on 3-panel, 6-panel storyboards. I think Shawn did things vertically, or no, it was horizontal. Right? There's like 3 panels in each. You multiply that by 300 some odd pages. That's 900 one panel.
Yeah.
So if anything, I had to pick up speed, right? I couldn't over render. I just needed to worry about the gesture and obviously like clear storytelling by way of composition and potentially even lighting. Just the more clear my storytelling was, the faster the process went, because the director and supervising director and the producers, and this was again on Tron, they still did things old school back then when I was working. So by the time I had gotten to my second tour at Warner Brothers, they were already outputting everything to tape, so we would be able to watch it in the editing room. But on Tron, they still did things old school Disney, where they would print the entire stuff that I had storyboarded and then put them up on tack boards on the wall, and I would have to walk the length of one of the hallways.
Oh wow!
I think it was I can't remember which building it was on the Disney lot, but I would point at every single panel and go, and then Tron does this, and then he does that, and blah 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 blah.
Interesting.
So that was a lot of fun. That was a lot of like old school Disney coming to front, like a boys action adventure show, which had a lot more drawings and a lot more explaining and a lot more.
Right.
Yeah.
That's really cool. So you got to see that early transition over from traditional to digital kind of taking place.
Yeah. And I resisted it because I'm such an old fart that I was like, I just want to be able to, like, there's something to be said about me rendering on paper that there were the supply closets, at Disney and at Warner Brothers, and then over at Sony, where they would just give us as many, like pens or paper, whatever you need, like Post-its. But I like the tactile feeling of it.
Yeah.
But I think that was more for me than, like, as soon as I turned that part of my brain off and I made it about like the production, Storyboard Pro became like pretty seamless. Like I stopped caring about like the experience and focused that attention and energy towards the storytelling instead.
Okay. So you were able to adapt pretty quickly in that regard, but
yeah.
In your heart, do you still have the preference for traditional, or is it just
And
about which tool can help you achieve your work more efficiently?
I think it's that, right? I
Yeah.
think in the beginning, it's about, well, there's always these things compound into it. That first one is preference, right? I really love feeling that texture, that tactile nature of like being able to draw on paper. But, and then there's if you're working in the comic book market, there is that um, part where there's the aftermarket component, right? Where you can
Yes.
sell the originals and so on. But really, I had to stop thinking that way because every page, and I tried to make every page pretty,
Yeah.
as opposed to like, hey, we've got to get this book out, we've got to get these storyboards done, and it doesn't matter how I get there, I've just got to get there. So once I shift into a gear where it's like it's part of a production, it becomes sort of like a non-issue what medium I'm working in. It's just how do I get this job done as quickly as possible, or at least within deadline, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Within reason, right? So,
Right.
um, so for you, were you starting out on a Cintiq with all of that back in the day? And what do you currently prefer to work on when you are working digitally?
Yeah, that was the weapon of choice back then because Wacom had the market cornered when it came to that, right?
You
And
did.
every production that I was ever in, when you have a group of artists in a pen, that was the tool that they gave you, and it was cool up until you would have to end up working from home, and now you're investing in that. Those things are really pricey, right?
Yeah,
So
very.
you have to end up investing in that, but there was no way around it. It just made things quicker. And the app or the program that we were using was almost like lariated, chained to that, right?
Yeah.
But nowadays, I love this iPad. I have kids,
Yeah.
I can only spend so much time in this office. So as soon as I'm done, and as soon as my hours are done in the office, but I still have a little bit more time to spend on finishing something, it's great to be able to leave the room and go into the living room or the family room and
For
be
sure.
able to get a little bit of work done, which is dangerous in a way, right? Because
Yeah.
I'm a huge proponent of like when the day is done, the day is done. I get to close the office doors and not think about work and just be present with my family.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's unavoidable, and it's nice to be able to drag that out there once in a while.
For sure. Yeah. The iPad
Yeah.
really, it's kind of changed the game in that regard
Oh
of
yeah.
being able to work from anywhere. I still remember the stories about Todd McFarlane lugging his Cintiq with him in his
Crazy.
carry-on and
Yeah,
traveling with
crazy.
it. So you
Crazy.
could
That's
ink.
that's dedication to your craft. More importantly, that's dedication to like, your production deadline and everybody that sort of like dominoes out from you, right? Because I don't
Yeah.
think Todd had to hand those images over to his colorists and his letterers and the production people. So I respect that a lot.
For sure.
Yeah.
Now, with the iPad, are you using any kind of screen? I know they make things to go on the screen to give that textural feel a little bit. Have you ever found anything like that you like, or do you just
Yeah.
go straight on there on the
No, I
traditional?
started I started not giving any sort of like stake in that because I'm like, dude, this is already pricey enough as it is. I'm not going to
Yeah.
add one more thing to make it more expensive. But I tried Paperlike at one point, and this is when, again, similar to Wacom, they had the market cornered on like the quality version of that textured screen protector, but it was not inexpensive, right?
No.
And this coming from a guy who is already working and potentially could have the expendable income to be able to spend on those little nice to haves, right? It was still kind of like, oh, this is pricey,
Yeah.
um but I eventually ended up finding something as soon as like technology catches up with the guys who first opened doors to it, right? So as soon as people caught up to what Paperlike was doing, I found something else, an alternative. And again, because it's become less proprietary, there's so many people who offer it now. So I
Oh
couldn't even
yeah.
tell you off the top of my head what brand it is, but it's pretty damn competitive for like half the price. So
Yeah, yeah. I
yeah,
use one called I think it's AstroPad, and it's
sure.
it's like a magnetic one, so it's not
I've
even
seen it.
like where you don't have to put the sticky stuff on your
I've seen
screen or
it.
anything. Yeah, it's really
Yeah.
good, and it comes with a pin tip that you change out on your pen, and it gives
Yeah,
it
for
more
sure.
like a nib or a mechanical pencil kind of feel on
Yeah.
there. It's the
Yeah, yeah.
closest one I've found to. It's still not the same though. It
Oh, for sure.
doesn't feel like
For sure.
traditional.
But I think like at this point, it's like a good problem to have. You know what I mean? Like whereas
Definitely.
before we had zero choices,
Yeah.
nowadays you have like easily a dozen, if not more, choices as for like what feels good. I don't think it's ever going to, from an experience perspective, ever going to replace like
No.
traditional. But what are you going to do? You try to get as close as you can and then get to work.
Yes. Now, earlier in the conversation, you were talking about how your style when you were initially trying to get into comics,
Yeah.
ended up kind of being better suited for animation at the time because
Yeah.
it was kind of a, I don't know if we call it a house style, or there definitely was a house style for image back in the day, especially in the 90s. And what really has always attracted me to your style is the dynamics and the exaggerated uh, proportions and the sense of movement you are able to
Mm,
convey in your
sure.
artwork.
Sure.
So when did you feel that there was a shift in the comic industry to where your style was better suited to be in mainstream comics?
I don't think there ever was.
Yeah,
That-
you're still
yeah,
still
yeah, yeah.
still waiting.
Yeah, I don't know I don't know what it is. I think, from the beginning, the reason why I chose a style that I did, which is closer to Aeon Flux than anything, is um I didn't I understood what it took to get a job, right? Hey, you draw like, XYZ popular artists at the time. But I also understood one, like I couldn't draw like those guys. Like on my best day, I couldn't draw like Jim Lee. I couldn't draw like whomever it was that was hot at the time, like Mark Silvestri, right? But also I just didn't feel right about like like I understood the value of establishing a voice that early. Like I didn't want to be another clone, So that
Right.
started getting around back then. It was like, oh, you're just a clone of insert XYZ. And there's
Yeah.
back then, if you're less arrogant, like I was incredibly arrogant, right? But for back then, if you're less arrogant, you just try to do what you can to make to try to get the gig, like to make
Yeah.
some headway, to be recognized, to like be brought on full time, and so on and so forth. And then from there, you build out, the legacy style that everybody ends up copying. But for me, I was like, I want a style and a voice right off the bat. Again, a lot of it is arrogance of youth. And
Yeah, but
then
I
go ahead.
was just gonna to say, like, the arrogance of youth and all that aside, like, it's also knowing that you have to be able to enjoy the work and enjoy
Yeah, sure,
what you're doing. So
sure.
if you're adopting a style that you don't really particularly enjoy
That's true.
drawing that
That's
way,
true.
it's
Yeah.
going to be a lot harder to get through the work, right?
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's interesting that you say that because, like, I like seeing Jim Lee. I like seeing Mark Silvestri. I didn't particularly like drawing like them.
Right.
It
Yeah.
wasn't. It wasn't in my sort of like, ooh, I would love to learn how to crosshatch like that. I just thought, hey, that looks cool. But when I started doing it, I was like, oh wait, this doesn't feel good. This is not giving me the sort of like thrill of like when I accomplish a look.
Yeah.
Like, oh man, I love the way that, oh gosh, that core shadow works. You know what I mean? Like that never appealed to me. So I had to go look for that on my own. And I think again, when I saw Aeon Flux for the first time, I was like, oh, that looks fun. Those
Yeah.
proportions look great. Those shapes look like there's something to be paying attention to. But it worked for me. Like it's been an uphill climb. And to go back to answer your question, when did it eventually turn? I can't tell you, right? I still don't think like back then. I used to think like I'll just do so much of it that I become undeniable. These days, because I'm much older, I have a more sort of like humble perspective. Like I always assume nobody knows my work up
Right.
until they tell me they know my work, if that makes any sense, right?
Yes.
Like back then, I was like, oh, you're gonna know my work. These days, I'm all like, I haven't been in the comic book, in the public eye of comic book readers. People probably don't know me. I have to go like resend samples or whatever it is that goes through my head, when I'm going
Yeah.
through that space. But you know, back then it was just like coming up with samples, not getting any not getting any favorable response from it, and just being flippant, and probably as a coping mechanism, being flippant about it and going like, they just don't know how good I am.
Yeah.
I don't I don't know when it crossed over that people were like, oh yeah, that's really relevant. I think it's when I started getting away from the arrogance and sort of like the stubbornness of like it has to look like this, and started going into a space of like, here's the stuff that I really love drawing, but here's all these other influences that make this stuff more viable. Because I
Yeah.
think a light bulb went off in my head of like, they're not just selling a style, they're also selling, there's comic book publishers, right? They're
Yes.
not just selling a style, they're selling a product, right? And if the buying audience is looking at the, like, if what they like to eat is hamburgers, it doesn't make sense to force feed them some kind of foreign dish that they've never had before and expect it to be
Yeah.
successful, right? If they are pumping out mainstream stuff, right? Like, 480 million sold, and to suddenly go like, oh, we're going to serve you something that we've never had on our menu before and expect you to like that too, that doesn't make any sense. So I started finding opportunities to be like, here's a really consumable approach to this technique or this shape or this character or whatever it is. I think that's when it started to really click for, it started becoming a little bit more palatable for editors to be like, I think we know how to use that. I think that's not a complete alien departure from what we do here, and we can kind of squeeze you in. It was still experimental, but at least it opened a few more doors that were completely shut to me from the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah. It sounds like it was just a matter of the timing being right and continuing to work through the process. And
I mean, maybe
yeah.
I akin it to like maturity, like when
Yeah.
you're a kid and you're just, trying to make some kind of mark, right? You don't want to be you want to be that, not Jim Lee, but the next Jim Lee, right? That was that was
Yeah.
the high water mark for me. Like, I want to have my own voice. I want to have my own look. And certainly I did, but it wasn't very marketable. So it started from there. But as soon as I matured enough to understand it's not just about my work, but it's how my work is being, you know, however it's being perceived and how it's being bought ultimately, right? Like, I think that's critical. I'm not saying change, right? Do whatever you want with your work. For like the young people who are coming up, they want to have their own style, they want to have their own voice, but understand, like, when at some point, if and when you do hit a wall, like, analyze it from a different perspective, potentially from the consumer, potentially from the publisher, and so on.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you a little bit about your first published comic work.
Oh, gee. Yeah.
I know. We got to
Yeah.
do that. One, like most artists, you probably look back at it and cringe, but
Yeah.
what was the first published gig that you got that stands out in your mind?
Mainstream wise, it was a Superman annual, but comic book wise, I worked for Glenn Danzig on this
Oh,
series, on
nice.
this imprint that he had called Verotic. And I couldn't show my kids that now to say, like, if my life depended
Right.
on it, it was just too risque. It was as close to like, hey, that's not appropriate for that age group. But back then, he the story behind that is that he had called Peter Chung about potentially, because Glenn, I think, is a fan of a lot of different people. That guy's art collection is freaking crazy.
Oh, I bet.
But he was a fan of Peter's and Flux, and he had called Peter while I was on that show and had said, like, hey, once you're done, excuse me, if you have time, can you help on this new imprint that I have? Do you think you could contribute? And Peter said, I'm going to be in post-production for the next X amount of months, but there's this kid on my crew that, is pretty close to drawing what I draw. And he recommended me, and that's how I started up that relationship with Glenn.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
kind of one of those serendipitous, accumulation of different events and acquaintances and all these things. Like, I hear a lot of these stories. So it's like right place at the right time, and
yeah,
develops into something.
Yeah, I think on top of that too is that, it's getting a comic book gig or any sort of professional gig in art. It seems impenetrable, and things have been put in place to make it really, really appear to be impenetrable. But the longest or the most success I've ever had in being brought onto a production or being brought onto a project is like through word of mouth, right? So if there's anything that there's one more thing I can impart to people who are breaking in, it's like establishing a really good working relationship with whomever it is that's bringing you on, and have them perceive you as somebody who brings value to the production, right? Because people want to work with people who are easy to manage, who are, their expectations are met whatever deadline that it may be, but also when it comes to the quality of your work. And I think that's the reason it was so easy for Peter to recommend me, because he understood my work ethic. He understood like the quality of my work. And then from there, I jokingly say like I've fell ass backwards into every gig that I've ever gotten, which is not untrue.
Right.
But it's also because when I get into a space, I always assume the position of like, I want to contribute as best as I possibly can, because I want to like, I want this. I've also had the benefit of like working for a bunch of my friends, and I don't want to misrepresent them for bringing me on, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
So it's like I always want to do my best for them, so that whomever it is that they're reporting up to understands, oh, that's a good draft or whatever, that's a good team member. And then things get significantly easier, from easier, not automatic. It gets easier because the next thing that you apply for, hopefully people have that really great memory of like, oh, I remember working with that guy. And, he made the production so much easier. There's everything is upside, or for the most part, everything is upside to that guy. I've had experiences in my career when I let my ego get the better of me. And I started thinking that like my poop doesn't smell, So, when the ego got in the way, I thought I could do whatever the heck I want. And that didn't come to pass. So it made things even clearer that once I do get into a production, really do my best to be able to contribute so that it helps prolong my relevancy and my productivity.
Yeah. And that collaborative process, when you were working in animation with your storyboarding and everything, how much do you work with the writer? Do you get to collaborate with the writer at all in regard to animation versus comics? Because I know in comics there's that very direct working relationship with the writer from time to time, but in animation, I feel like there's a lot more moving pieces in animation and a lot more people working on a project. So did you get to work with the writers at all more direct when you were on those projects?
Yeah, a lot actually. And it depending, right? It's rare that I've found that the writing staff or the narrative staff was so impenetrable that they didn't understand, like sort of like they were unwilling to hear why I quote unquote changed something, But I remember one of the best experiences that I ever worked on, a production I ever worked on was for Tron Uprising. And Bill Wolkoff, who is what did Bill I thought like, oh my gosh, Bill is working on Star Trek now, That writer's room was incredibly open, like Dwayne Capizzi, as well as Dwayne McDuffie, who I'd worked on Ben 10 and Justice League Unlimited. Those people were +1 people, which is like, here's what the script says, right? Here is the narrative track that they're trying to go for, right? So here is, we're going to bring these characters low, we're going to bring them out of it, yada, yada, like the basic 3-act structure in 21 minutes. As long as that doesn't get lost, right? They are, and by what I mean is like, if you are trying to make that better because it makes the thing better, right? If your energy is being spent, like, I understand the themes that you're going for, I understand the trajectory that you're aiming towards, the momentum that you're going for, but here's what we can do in order to like crank that up. They love that, right?
Nice.
And establishing that trust with them, where you don't go in there, well, at least for me, I didn't go in there like, I try not to go in there arrogant, right? Maybe in my rhetoric, in my language, I may have come off that way, but like, I always want to make this script so much better, because I understand like, here's what it looks like in words, but here's what it ends up looking like in pictures. Absolutely. But if I understand what you're going for, maybe there's something I can do to make that lift a little bit less heavy.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, when you work with those people, especially in that collaborative space, and they are sort of not dictatorial, and they understand the value of like, now I've got to give you the baton and let you run the next 100 meters with this thing. It's pretty magical. I remember on Tron, there was a scene that I think I went outside the box as far as like what was in the script, and it had gotten as far as drawing it. Because oftentimes these conversations are like, the office doors are pretty open. So I can go into any of those writers' offices and be like, the head writer's office, and be like, hey, here's what's on paper, but can I try this instead? And it goes up to a certain level of chain of command, which is like my director and supervising director and so on. But like oftentimes I just skip all those and just go straight to the writer and go like, here's what I'm going to try. And if it's, the difference between where I was in my youth and trying to storyboard and in my later on when I had a few more notches in my professional belt is that I tried to understand what the story was, as opposed to like, oh, I can impose my sort of take on this. It was less about that and more about like, I understand where the story is going, and my take comes from the shot selection, not because I'm trying to like reshape the story. I'm trying to +1, +10 the story through my shot selection, through the momentum and so on. And the director then takes those shot selection and cuts them in such a way where it helps serve the story. And as soon as I matured enough, my brain got enough of a wrinkle to be like, it's not about you, it's about this entire production, right? It became so much easier, right?
Yeah.
And that's when I think that is the courtesy, if not the trust equity, that the directors and senior people on the staff never extended to me, because I never conducted myself like that, like a professional. Like, I want to make your stuff better, right?
Yeah.
And here's what I'm going to try to do in this collaborative space. As soon as I build that bridge of trust with whomever it is that I'm working with, I come to find that the production or the whole process of making stuff in a production gets significantly easier, air quote, easier.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, it's interesting hearing your perspective, from an artist perspective on it, because I just had Adam Beechin on, and he wrote for Ben 10 and the Batman and some different things, and I was asking him about, like, for him as a writer, what's it like working with an artist and seeing like the things that he put down in words and the way he may have pictured in his head versus what the artist puts down. And he was saying a lot of times the artist can come up with a way even cooler than what he could have ever visualized. Yeah, we were talking about that collaborative process and how important it is. So now I've heard both sides of the coin on it. He said from time to time, it's doesn't come out the way you pictured it, but most of the most of the time the artist goes above and beyond what he could have ever imagined. Because it's that whole thing about, as an artist, practicality wise how certain things need to be portrayed versus the way a writer can visualize them and write them down and describe them.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And depending on what space that you're in animation, the thing gets told. What's the adage? Like, a story gets, the story gets done 3 different times, one in script, one in storyboarding, and once again in editing. Right.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's an entire assembly line and a collaborative process, and who's like leadership and figurehead you have to, from a creative perspective, you have to trust, because they need to make the final call on why a shot works and how its story momentum, the story's momentum goes and all that kind of stuff. So like, one of the better things that I'd come to learn, again, this is strictly speaking on a production space, most specifically an animation production, like, I try to get into a room with a writer whose script I'm working on as quickly as possible, or at the very least, if there's problem areas that's a little bit gray to me in the script, I try to make that collaborative effort really evident up front, so that if they do have a shot in their head, as a guy who has to do 200 some odd shots, why wouldn't I take that shot?
Yeah.
Like, you just did like 75% of the work for me. I just got to draw a prettier picture than when you could draw.
Exactly.
We're all running the same race. I'm just running a different leg of it than you are.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, for you, were comics a love of yours as a kid?
Oh
yeah, big thing. Yeah. What were some of your first comics that you remember picking up?
Oh gosh, I'll tell you the story that I've told before. So forgive me, for your audience. Forgive me if I've heard it before. If they've heard it before. My stepfather used to go to a local bookstore in which you would be allowed to trade in old paperbacks, and based on the credit that they gave you, you would go pick something out up to the point of that credit, right? To the worth of that credit. But also in the back of this store, this used bookstore, were like old Playboys and Penthouse.
Right.
Yeah. And so, sneaky, not so sneaky kid that I would kind of inch back there, right? But on one side of the bookstore, imagine the bookstore being shaped like an upside down U, right?
Yep.
At the top part of that U, where the arches, where all the stuff, where they were trying to keep it kind of away from the public eyes, all those salacious magazines. On the right-hand side of that U were all the used books, but on the left-hand side of that U were all the comic books, and they didn't order them, at least this store in the city that I grew up in, they didn't order them by way of publishers as they would do now. I think they still do that, right? There's a Dark Horse section, there's a Marvel section, there's a DC section. The way this place did it, they did everything alphabetically, So maybe there was a couple of times when they called out a DC comic to be a DC comic, but pretty much they put everything alphabetically. And the nature of the alphabetical system is that, A started at the bottom part, the bottom part of that U, and then as X goes closer to where the pornos were, right, that would kind of like meander over there, little horn dog that I was. And in trying to be sneaky, I happened to look down and there's the X-Men.
Oh, there you go.
And so that's when I started picking up those X books, is right around that time. And the funny thing is, if you were to ask me which one was my first, like what was the one that caught my eye, I couldn't tell you because I didn't even understand like comic book numbering systems back then. So I would just see an X title and I'm like, oh, that's kind of cool. I like these characters. I like this dude with like, concussive blast coming out of his face or whatever it was. And that's what got me started collecting X-Men in this specific store. And then like I would just say, okay, well, I've kind of caught up with all the X-Men stuff this month. I'll go to another part of the store and picked up Thor, and I picked up All-Star Squadron, and I just started seeing what I liked. But inevitably I just ended up going back to X-Men anyway, because I think just the nature of that was my first comic. I really love those characters. I like the way,
because it was closer to the X-rated section.
On top of the fact that it's it's next to the boobies, But yeah,
story,
I think X-Men as a series was my reintroduction. I couldn't tell you from back in the day when I was a kid if I had bought any comics. It wasn't anything consistent, but my consistent buying when the habit started is with X-Men, and then it just ballooned from there.
Well, being drawn to X-Men, you had to experience some pretty awesome artists, because that book tended to have a lot of the top artists of the time. Who are some artists that really stand out in your mind that inspired you from the X books?
Yeah, well, there's the obvious ones. Like I didn't understand the value of Mark Silvestri until later on, until I realized, God, that guy is so good.
Amazing.
Like I just paid attention. It's such a thankless job sometimes, right? When you do it poorly, like it's obvious where things are not so good in the storytelling. But Mark Silvestri made everything so easy with like Terry Austin and Dan Green, right, inking him.
Dan inked his stuff amazingly.
Yep.
And of course Terry did, but he meshed really well with Dan.
Agree. And I think at one point they went like 2 per month, and I can't imagine that today.
Yeah.
Anyway, so like those are obvious ones, like Mark Silvestri and obviously Jim Lee. When he came on board, he was undeniable. But for me, there was this time when John Byrne was drawing the X-Men, and I was catching up on back issues of that, and then I ran into Paul Smith, who I'd never. I can't even imagine. Like back then, I don't know, what made them. Like here's John Byrne. Here's Dave Cockrum, and like right after that, it's somewhere like maybe there's a John Romita Jr. in there somewhere in his earlier years, but definitely there was a Paul Smith run. And I had never seen anything like that before. It was like not rendered. It's just like as straightforward as possible, really clean lines, really clear storytelling. And it was one of those things that gave me agency to be like, I can do this, is acceptable in comic. Like, but it was such a short blip. And then next thing you know, it's Mark Silvestri and Jim Lee, and everything got super detailed again. But to this day, that stuff still sticks with me. And the funny thing is, later on, I had gotten an opportunity to talk to Paul Smith, and on occasion had enough bravery to give him a call and just really talk shop with him,
Yeah.
And I don't think it's a secret, but he facilitated that style. That's what people refer to, or maybe he's even referred to it as this, like that animation style or whatever.
Yes.
And it was
so dynamic.
Yeah, it's strictly because he needed to make monthly comics deadlines.
Yeah.
And if you take a look, the way he actually wanted to draw was closer to Alex Raymond. And a sample of that, the way he interpreted Alex Raymond, was on a book called The Golden Age that was written by my buddy, a dear friend of mine named James Robinson. And that was closer to what what Paul Smith preferred to draw like. But for X-Men, he had to shift into a gear that allowed him to do it monthly and still be happy with the work. But I thought all his work looked like that. So that to
Right.
me is the standout. And even to like as recently as yesterday, I was like, I'm going to stop rendering everything now. I'm just going to make this really super clean line and not have to worry about, at least clean, quote unquote, clean for me.
Yeah.
Omit as much of the rendering as possible. What is the bare minimum I can get away with for you to understand the figure and the shot and the environment? And then started going down that headspace again, which was similar to how I used to do things with my storyboarding. And there was not time to do fluff. It was like, what can I do to make this as clear as possible, as concise as possible, under this this oncoming juggernaut that is my deadline.
Yeah, deadlines. That's a whole topic in and of itself. I have heard the stories of multiple artists having to jam on something to make a deadline. I know.
For sure.
I know Wills and Jim Lee and all those guys used to, they would get something done in a weekend. Ryan Benjamin told me some crazy stories about making deadlines, and it's working on a monthly book. I don't think people often realize how much of a undertaking that can be.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. How many pages are modern comics now?
I think they've dropped them down because they were 22, but I want to say 20.
Really?
I think some they've even decreased them a little bit more. I heard Robert Kirkman talking about it the other day, and it was something to where it figured out they could put less pages and basically kind of help get ahead on the books because a couple less pages equals being able to get a little further ahead of the deadline.
Oh, for sure.
So it's definitely less than it used to be.
Okay. All right. And people still can't make monthly deadlines, which is weird.
Isn't that funny? Funny how that works. I wanted to talk about Arc Athena, your creator-owned book, man.
Yeah.
That was how. So it's funny because when I became a fan of your art many, many years ago, and I started seeing a bunch of your pieces, and I really appreciated the dynamics of it and everything. Then I kind of didn't realize that you were doing your creator-owned project, and I want to say I think I backed like the first crowdfunded thing you did for it, way back, and. So how did that all come to be? That it's like you getting to work on your own thing. Was this did you have this idea in the back of your brain for a while of your own creator-owned property?
Full disclosure, I wanted to work on the X-Men because I thought there's a side story to this where I had just finished Uncanny X-Force, right? I don't know if you read that series by Rick Remender.
Yeah. Well, I looked at the art.
Oh, dude!
I'm one of those guys that I follow artists and I look at the art.
I get it.
So I read a few things, but mainly I'm looking at the art.
But imagine that, right? Where I was such a huge fan of it, not just because of the art, but because the story was so dang good, right? So, sure, I read it because who did the art? Is it Jerome Pena, right?
Yes.
So, Jerome was doing some really bold sort of it's unfair that you're doing this, between him and Olivier doing, I think Olivier was on Thor at that time.
Yeah,
anyway,
he was.
There's no reason why you guys are this good,
Yeah.
But then you couple it with the story that Rick Remender was telling on Uncanny X-Force. And it brought me back to why I loved X-Books, right? I had sort of taken a break, kind of fallen out of love with, X-Men titles because, for one reason or another, the stories that were being told had an audience. That audience I wasn't a part of, right?
Right.
And that's okay, right? But when I came back and read that, I can't remember who recommended it to me, and they said you should read this because it's going to bring you back. And when I did, I was like, oh my gosh, those are some of the best X-Men comics that I've read. Going back to Chris Claremont's run.
Yeah.
And so anyway, I wanted to get back into drawing X-Men comics again, or at the very least mainstream comics again, because I was drawing for video games, and at that point I think it was still animation, whatever. And so I had already had a working relationship with Rick, and so I messaged him and I said, hey Rick, come back and do another X-Force run, and I will draw the shit out of it. Forgive my person. I will draw the heck out of it, and there's very few things that'll, God bless him, like there are very few things that'll make Rick want to try something like that again. I think he had already been burned out with, I think he was his Captain America run, right? Where I can't recall the exact chronology, but he was already done, and he had already moved on to doing like Black Science and all these, all these creator-owned stuff that he's doing there at Giant Generator. And but there's very few things that will tempt Rick to come back. And me say, I think one of them is me saying, "Hey, Rick, I want to draw X-Men, and I want you, please, can you write it?" And he toiled over that, the idea of that, right? And he says, "Dude, oh, that sounds so freaking awesome," And he goes, "Let me sleep on it," right? And I think it was a couple of days he came back, and he's like, "I'll come back, but I have this feeling that you're going to do 2 or 3 issues and just get bored with the whole thing and like leave me high and dry." And I think again he had sort of, that mainstream stuff had run its course, and he wasn't willing to do a project like that, take on a thing like that, if it wasn't me and him doing it. I think that the spirit of his message was that. And I really had to come to terms with that, that thing that he said, which is like, "Oh yeah, you'll get bored," And I thought, like, F you, I'm not going to get bored. Rick knows me, right? He was like, right. I'm going to unlock that opportunity to do 3 issues and be like, this isn't fun anymore, which I don't know, man. If I was drawing Uncanny X-Force, I'd lose my mind, especially that run in specific, right?
Yeah.
But that planted the seed in me. And sometimes that's all it takes, is to put like a chip on my shoulder to be like, hey, you can't do this, right? You wouldn't be able to. And also there's a part of me that as I got back into reading a few issues of X-Men, I think this was fast forward to, House of X Powers of 10. Like as I started reading some more of those issues and everything thereafter, I started going like, wait, I want to draw these, but I'm unsatisfied with the way these X-Men books are going. Like I was really unhappy with it. And at some point I just heard myself talking about it, and I got kind of sick of like, just shut up, just shut up and go draw your own thing, right? Like instead of complaining, which, people have, it's really super easy for them to do. Like I have the opportunity, and I think the toolkit to be able to do something about it. So instead of hearing myself talk about it all the time, I just shut up and go do something about it. But also couple that with, hey, you won't last 3 issues, Yeah. And so I said, like, screw that. I'm going to do this.
I'm picturing you like the Michael Jordan meme from the last Dance. And
Yeah.
he said that, and I took that personally.
Yeah, no, it's that. I mean, that's not untrue, right?
Yeah.
That's sometimes my buddy, one of my best friends, his name is Sam Liu. He's a director over there at Warner Brothers, and I remember being on the Batman with him, and I remember the way he motivated me to like overperform was to drop a little, plant a little seed in my head that, all the other teams were making fun of because there's multiple storyboard teams on one production, right? Like all the other teams were making fun of us, saying that we're the novices and we're the unproven and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, I'll effing show you that we're unproven and we're not good at this job or whatever. So similar thing, but I had to find that motivation for myself to go like, somebody out there doesn't think that I can do more than like 3 issues, right? I'm talking way too much trash about like X-Men and mainstream comic books. I need to shut up, and I'll show myself that I can do this. And then the other one was like, crowdfunded books were releasing not in a regular sort of like clip, right? Like people would crowdfund, wait a year and a half, and I thought that's a broken model,
For sure, yeah.
Like, because by the time people give you your money, life happens, and next thing you know, A, maybe you can't deliver it, or B, you're so out of mind that they don't even remember that they backed your stuff. I've had that happen to me more than once.
Oh, yeah.
And so I said, I think one of the preventatives of that is because people aren't getting the work done ahead of time, right? Like it was a broken model in my head, but it by no means is that 100% true for everybody, right? Some people need that upfront money to be able to continue to work on the books that they're working on. That's totally cool. That's totally legitimate. I don't take anything away from them. But for me, it didn't make much sense. So instead, I just drew all 300 some odd pages of Athena first, and then released, if that makes sense, right? Like,
Yes.
I said, you know what? I'm not going to be the weak link in this production pipeline. I'll draw all the black and white, and then start having it so that the colorist and the letterist and the editors, the editor goes in there and do
I
their
can
job.
tell you, as a consumer, it was very refreshing because I
Thanks,
have
man.
been the victim to backing something and then
Oh yeah,
waiting, having it show up 3 years later and forgetting that I had ever
for sure.
supported it, you know?
Yeah, for sure. And the compounding effect of that is maybe it wasn't my project that's late, but let's say it was mine, right? Like if I'm late with a project, for whatever reason, it's not applicable to everyone. Not every consumer, not every backer is going to think of it like this, but like it has a knockdown effect of trust, if that
Yeah.
makes any sense, right? Like I backed the Kickstarter thing once and it was it was X amount of months late, if it wasn't a year later, whatever it is. I'm going to be, me personally, I'm going to be that much more gun shy
Yep.
about backing the next thing, not for any other reason than except for this other thing, and you do that multiple times and it doesn't take once, right? Maybe it takes once for some people, but maybe like the third time you're like, I don't want to back anything anymore. And for
Yeah.
me, I wasn't only holding up the banner for myself, right? I'm in cahoots with the guys from Iconic Comics who always deliver on time at a steady clip. They tell you it's going to be in your delivery address by this amount of time when this thing ends, and lo and behold, it shows up 2 weeks before that, right?
Yeah.
So you want to talk about establishing a pattern that leads to a foundation of trust. That's it. And once they started doing that, I wasn't going to be the person that breaks that chain, so
Right.
I had that reputation to sort of live up to, which is awesome for me.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Where did the story idea come from?
Oh gosh, it was, from a technical perspective, is understanding what makes Chris Claremont's story strategies work, right? And then from a narrative perspective, it was me approaching what it meant to have two characters who didn't understand or value the definition of like accountability and leadership.
Yeah.
And that was super important to me, at least still to this day, but in that point in my life, I wanted to tell that story of like what it meant to run a team who had dissimilar responsibilities from a ground level, right? But a united responsibility, at least seemingly, under one umbrella, right? And as soon as somebody breaks their understanding and fulfillment of those responsibilities, how it has a knockdown effect on everybody else. That's like I'm talking about it very generally now,
Yeah.
right? But what I really wanted to tackle were the kinds of characters who didn't quite understand their responsibility because they thought it was beneath them, or they thought that they quote unquote deserve more, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it
And so I thought
does.
there was great conflict in that, especially with the two main characters from each of those teams that I was representing. So
Yeah.
that was great. It made it so much easier once I figured that out.
Would you say this was kind of like your version or your love letter to the X-Men, the X-Men books that you loved in a
Well,
sense?
that part's undeniable only because again, I took out as many X-Men comic books, going back, like Chris Claremont stuff, going as far back as
Yeah.
like the Phoenix Saga or whatever, and like really understanding why I was so attached to these characters. And if I was smarter, which I don't claim I am, I would have done a book with like less characters, right?
Right.
And one of the biggest pieces of feedback that I've gotten, and I've taken that to heart, which is like, I do not have 50 years worth of like X-Men issues to establish these characters. So it's harder to get readers to invest in them. Short
Yeah.
of me saying, hey, listen, I'm going to focus, like out of the team of like 7 each, right? 14 collected characters, right? Like I'm going to focus on these two. And it's a good problem to have, but they say like, oh, I feel like you didn't talk enough about character 3 down the line, if that makes any sense, right?
Yeah.
And I go like, oh, there's just no way for me to do it. But what's great, at least, if I dig into that a little bit, is that there was something good about that character, enough for them to go like, oh, I wish he had talked about that character. Because man, I would love to have that story. And I'm like, yeah, if what I'm planning continues to grow, right, I'm going to end up talking about those characters eventually, just not for this one. So it's a good problem to have for sure.
Yeah, you got to keep them waiting for something too.
Fingers crossed.
Say,
Yeah,
give me more
I can
time.
deliver.
We'll get to that. Yeah.
Yeah.
As we start getting close here to wrapping up, the last thing I kind of wanted to talk to you about is how InkPulp came together, because it's an amazing podcast and one of my
Is it?
favorites.
Okay.
Yeah, I
I'll
love
take
it,
your word
man.
for it.
I love it. I love the dynamic between
Yeah,
you and Shawn and Matteo, and it's just plus it gives that kind of look into the creators' minds. Like I like seeing you guys bring on your peers and in talking to other creators on there. So how did
sure.
the idea for Ink Pulp come together? Is it like, let's we're gonna hang out anyway. You're my friends. Let's do a podcast together. Or what was the impetus
Yeah.
for that?
What brought it back? Like, well, Shawn was doing it way ahead of people. I think, in part, not in whole. He took inspiration from, who is it? Mark Merrill's podcast. Wait, who's the Mark Maron's podcast?
Mark
Right. I
Maron,
can't
yeah.
remember what it was called. Right. So he liked that, and I jokingly tell Shawn he was using that old version of Ink Pulp as like therapy sessions. Like, I feel
Yeah.
terrible. Can you tell me how you feel terrible too? And then from there he had to wind it down a little bit because the travel or the availability of people became less accessible to him for whatever
Yeah.
reason, right? And I think right around the pandemic, it was, people were stuck at home, right, as they were, and it was just an opportunity. At least for me, I'll speak from my experience. Like, it was an opportunity for me to talk to my friends that
Yeah.
I didn't get a chance to hang out with at conventions anymore. I didn't get a chance to hang out with like post convention dinners and so on and so forth. So it was an excuse for me to like get on a call, and then Shawn just hit the record button, and we'd been doing that for a while. Obviously, we can't be as crass as we typically are because people are
Yeah.
watching now. But it's the stuff that we talk about post convention, and I can't recall who told it to us. It's like, hey, this is the stuff that you guys talk about when we're all just hanging out. And I was like, yeah, yeah. And then people somehow found value in being able to just seeing us hanging out, which still astounds me to this day.
Yeah.
Like,
I
okay,
think
I
it's
guess.
the authenticity behind it, because it is you guys being genuine and just being yourselves, how you would be
Sure.
around each other off camera. I think that gets conveyed in the conversation.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, thank you for that. But I also, again, we there are plenty of times where we travel down a conversational path, and it gets a little crass in whatever
Yeah.
capacity. Like, I'll say that I'll use the term like cancelable, and I'm like, please, please, please don't. Like, if we're in a hotel room and everybody's just gotten back to dinner and everybody's a little bit tipsy or whatever, which I'm not typically because I don't drink,
Right.
and I rarely go out to dinner with them, but like, all the floodgates open. There's so much trash talking. There is so much stuff that you're like, oh, this is not meant for public consumption, especially with people who have like super soft feelings about this kind of stuff. But
Yes.
when we can find a way to sort of like self-edit and understand the value of what we're talking about, and we understand like, hey, listen, don't talk stupid, right? It's nobody deserves that stupidity. It turns out to be pretty fun. And again, at its core, it's me hanging out with my friends, two of my best friends. So it makes it easy.
Absolutely. That's awesome, Eric. Well,
Yeah, man.
listen, as we wrap up here at the end, I want to give you an opportunity to promote anything that you have coming out or coming up. Let people know where they can support, so we can send them all there to give you some backing if you're doing
Yeah.
any more crowdfunding. I know, didn't Arc Athena like 5 and 6 come out recently, or
Yeah.
getting ready to
Yeah.
come out?
Yeah, they came out simultaneously because people had been waiting like a year, closer to a year and a half for both of those. So I figured, why make them wait any longer? Which, in a way, may have been sort of like this double-edged sword, like, hey, you don't have to wait for it, but now I'm asking you for twice your money. But I'm a horrible salesman. If you're willing to spend twice your money on supporting me, please go to iconiccomics.com. The entire series is available there now. It's all in hardcover. And right now, if you buy all 6 books at the same time, there is this phenomenal, outstanding discount that you can buy as opposed to buying them individually. So now is a great time to invest in seeing and reading along, something that I'm very proud of. And as a matter of fact, if and when you do support it, do me a favor and reach out. Tell me what you think. I'd love to hear back from you because I'm cranking away at series 2 now. Plus,
Awesome.
I'm doing the Arc Athena Common America crossover, which I'm super excited about because you want to talk about Paul Smith. It's my opportunity to start paring down all of that detail and still somehow retain a style and a look that I'm super happy with, which in the X amount of pages that I've experimented with so far seems to be trending pretty well. Let's see.
Awesome.
When I'm all said and done. And like you said, if you go to, InkPulp podcast on YouTube, you'll find us there. So come and listen. Most importantly, go into the comment section and tell Shawn and Matteo, they're starting to look more and more like each other every day, and that bugs the hell
They
out of
are.
you.
This is true. They are.
It's kind of gross. It's kind of gross. Stop doing that.
And I'm throwing your website up on the screen here.
Please.
For the audio listeners, tell them where they can find your website.
Oh, yeah. Go to ericcanete.com. I should be making a better effort, a concerned effort about like putting stuff up there. I've really got to get my social media game up to speed. But again, with kids and projects, it's the third thing, if not the fifth thing on my list to do. But go there, sign up for the newsletter. I'm going to get behind that starting November of this year and do that in earnest, just so I can bring in as much people awareness for new projects potentially coming out. Conventions I'm going to be doing, original art sales drops are going to be available to them. So sign up for that newsletter.
Awesome. And your socials pretty much everywhere at Eric Canete. Is that correct?
Yeah. It's on Twitter/X and on Instagram. It's Eric Canete. I just opened up my TikTok, which is funny to me. I'd never thought I'd be on that platform. But somebody else took Eric Canete. I went behind the scenes and tried to ask him, hey, you're not really using this. Can I get it from you? But no reply.
No.
But I'm easy enough to find on there. So please go do it. You'll see the art, and hopefully you'll recognize it as mine.
I haven't pulled the trigger on TikTok yet. You'll have to let me know how it goes.
It's fun. Right now for me, it's fun because I'm trying to figure out the puzzle that is TikTok, which is like everything from the algorithm, the consistency of posting, blah, blah, blah. I suspect because I have a short fuse when it comes to like it's short interest in like maintaining any social media, which is a failure on any freelancing artist. Like as soon as I figure that out, at least enough so I'm like, okay, I get how this works. I'm probably going to end up getting bored and not post to it for like a year.
Well, somebody just needs to tell you you're going to get bored and stop doing it. So you spite them and you do it.
Yeah, well, yeah, if you think I'm going to get bored, I'm going to triple down now.
There you go. Eric, man, I had so much fun with you today. I know there's a lot of different things we could have kept talking about. I would love to have you on again in the future to chat about any upcoming stuff you got going and to geek out more about all the artists we love and everything. So it was an absolute pleasure, my friend. Hang out with me for a moment. I'm going to give everybody my spiel. Everybody, if you're listening, you've already found the podcast or you're watching us on YouTube. Appreciate everybody's support. Having such a fun time getting all these amazing creative people on. Nerdy Musings now has a Patreon. So if you go to patreon.com/Nerdy Musings, you can support for as cheap as $7 a month. You get access to all sorts of exclusive things. We're going to be doing some live podcasts that you can only get through there, some other exclusives, maybe some stickers and fun stuff. So head on over to Patreon. And if you ever want to give the podcast a 5-star review over on Apple Podcasts, that would be awesome. But by all means, don't feel obligated. And in the meantime, everybody, keep it nerdy.